Today on the American Land Seller, we are honored to introduce our guest, Joe Richeson, a seasoned expert in the water well industry with 23 years of experience at Gothenburg Irrigation and Well Service in Gothenburg, Nebraska. As the co-owner and general manager, Joe has been committed to serving customers with integrity and dedication. His work goes beyond business. It's about nurturing the community and spreading knowledge about the vital role of water in irrigation. Joe's expertise is backed by a solid academic foundation with a Bachelor's degree of Science in Agribusiness from the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. His leadership skills were further honed through prestigious programs like Nebraska's LEAD Program and Dawson Area Development Leadership Class, as well as Nebraska Well Drillers Association Leadership Academy. An active participant in state-level initiatives, Joe contributes to the Nebraska Health and Human Resources Regulation and Licensure Examination Subcommittee Task Force. His expertise is evident, having been a past presenter for the pump installation section of the Nebraska Well Drillers Association. But there's more to Joe than just his professional prowess. He holds an explosives license for Sonar-Jet rehabilitation and is a respected member of the National Groundwater Association. Joe's dedication to his community is unparalleled. He is the vice president of operations for the Gothenburg Improvement Company, serves on the Dawson County Planning and Zoning Commission, and has held roles in Gothenburg's Redevelopment Authority and Chamber Board. His commitment to the future generations is also evident through his work with the Agriculture Future of America Scholarship Partnership. A man of many talents and a passion for the outdoors, Joe is an Eagle Scout who also cherishes spending time at Jeffrey Lake with his family. Join us as we explore the depths of land, water, and agriculture with Joe, a true steward of the land and a guardian of our natural resources. As always, we hope you can take something away from this episode.
Welcome to the American Land Seller Podcast with your host, Joe Richeson. Joe is an accredited land consultant and multi-state land broker with American Legacy Land Company. Join us each week as we explore all things land. We bring you fresh insights and expert guests on sales, marketing, regulations, economics, and so much more. Visit www.americanlandseller.com and find us on one of your favorite podcast platforms.
Okay, Joe and our special guests, let's get started.
Hey everybody, we're back here with the American Land Seller Podcast, and today, kind of a fun day we're going to have talking to one of my lifelong friends here from Gothenburg, Nebraska, Joe Richeson. Him and I have known each other for a long time. He is one of the more well-known well drilling companies in the area. He's multi-state like I am, and so I thought it'd be kind of fun to sit down and talk to him. They always say, Joe, that whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting over, right? So today we're going to learn a little bit about water in Nebraska and about wells and stuff. So how you doing today, brother?
Doing well, and you're not wrong on the whiskeys for drinking, waters for fighting, because there's times that by the ounce water costs more than whiskey.
Yeah, well, if you don't believe me, if you don't believe us, go talk to some agents in Colorado. I have my license out there, and man, it's brutal right now. Like you definitely got to know what you're getting into. And so, but anyway, so kind of, like we've talked, we've worked together numerous times. And one of the things that I feel like I've learned over the years is the value of bringing you in earlier than later, right? So I think during a lot of times, especially when you're talking about ranch land, farm ground, again, we mentioned Colorado, Wyoming, even to a certain extent. I think that, my wisdom tells me that bringing you or someone like you in early, can you just kind of talk about, like, first of all, whether or not you agree or disagree with me, and if you agree, then like, what's that look like?
Right.
Bringing you in early.
So I do a lot of research, and we did one, and we ended up not doing it because with you down Southwest Nebraska, because something happened with another process. But you call me and give me information, and I'm going to go to what I have on file to see what we have for information on a well. But that's more of a localized thing. When we start traveling, east to west across the state, I'm not going to have the personal information, but there is information on Department of Natural Resources website that I'll look at when the well was drilled, the formations, how much it pumped from originally. And this could be a house well or a livestock well, domestic well. Now, irrigation wells are supposed to be registered with Department of Environmental Energy and Department of Natural Resources, but things drilled in the less than 50 gallon a minute world prior to 1993 do not have to be registered. So there might not be information out there for a house well, for example. But it's the more information, and sometimes you're under inspection timelines, a 10-day window, and, to give me time to get things scheduled, give me time to do a little research. It helps both parties, especially when there's capital expenses involved. If, in an irrigation well, irrigation wells can be, just the well alone can be anywhere from $30,000 to $80,000-$90,000. That doesn't include the pump.
Sure.
So the sooner your client or a realtor's client or a land sales client knows what they're up against, if there are concerns, the better for both parties. And there's not always concerns. I mean, we've gone to eastern part of the state, $3.5 million sale. All the wells were great. We go to the western part of the state for $1.5 million sale. Well was pumping so much sand, the water was brown. And so, the sooner people know, the better off everybody is.
Well, and even some of the crazy stuff, like I got involved in a deal where we had a residential agent had a property listed, and I had an investor that wanted to make a run at it. And so we start looking at things. Well, it was a 4 pivots in a section pretty much. And when we started looking at it, and I think I even called you on this one because I'm like, I am trying to figure out where all the water comes from on this deal, because they'd already sold 3 of the pivots off. We were looking at 1, and so
the well was across the road.
Yeah.
And didn't even aesthetically, I guess not aesthetically, but geographically tie to the pivot that it was running. And yeah, I think they had to do an easement on that. And we see those things. You see multiple wells running pivots. When you get out of the money zone when it comes to water here in west central Nebraska, where we're 1,000 feet of saturated thickness of water, but you get outside of this area, there's some pivots that take 2-3 wells. So yeah.
So no, but that I just, like I said, that was one of those experiences where I was like, man, I think the wiser side of me says maybe we should start implementing encouraging our clients to identify, is there any issues with this? Is it registered? Can we have it tested? And I think that's probably money well spent. So if you're going to come out and you're going to do an inspection on a irrigation well, let's say, what are we looking at as far as how much time lead do we need to give you? And then what does that whole process look like? What are you going to do when you come out?
Well, time leads can vary. The more time, the better. I went into eastern Colorado. They called in July. There was a bunch of parcels of land selling out there, and I had about a 10-day lead time, and I made it work. I went on a Saturday. I was gone for 15 straight hours there and back, tested 12 wells. Now out there in Colorado, I did not check drawdown levels because of licensing reasons, but I check gallons and pressure and things like that. So in a perfect scenario, we'll run 2 tests when we're on a site. We will, if there's a pivot there and it's not cold, you run into those situations. This time of year, you want to do a test. It's a little hard to run a pivot when it's even 30 degrees. You really don't want to run a pivot because it can frost up and it can come down. But in a perfect scenario where the temperature is not a problem, we'll run it through the pivot, check the gallons and pressure as it's designed through that pivot nozzle package. And then we'll disconnect the pivot piping and hook up our propeller flow meter in a screw valve so we can control the pressure. So as we control the pressures, we see what the gallons are. So we'll get a gallon reading at 600 gallons of what that pressure is. And if there's an inspection port that we can get a drawdown tester in there, we'll see what the drawdowns in the well are for pumping levels. That drawdowns, pumping level, same thing. We'll get what the static water level is, and we'll check the amps. We can tell a lot on a system if the amps are high or low compared to what they are for the gallons, and if we know what the design point is for the pump. Is what I mean by that is, say there's a hole in the column pipe down in the well, and it's pushing water out and not making it to the surface. As we're adjusting the gallons on the surface, and the gallons are changing by a couple hundred gallons, if the amps aren't changing, that tells me the pump is still pumping the water, but we're not seeing that to the surface. So we've been able to diagnose some issues just based off of amp readings. You know, the one I mentioned out western Nebraska, it was pumping so much sand, we could visibly see the sand. You're not seeing that sand when it's pumping through the pivot. When we're pumping on the ground, when it's pumping sand, it's going to pile up and you're going to see it. And it was pretty extensive. Mm-hmm. You know, we try to be as thorough as we can on those tests. And, you know, get as much information to the person that needs the information to make purchase decisions.
Yeah, right. So walk me through that, if you don't mind. Like, if I'm an investor from Omaha and I have a couple extra $1 million that I want to go, you know, invest it into a farm somewhere. What does the report look like that you're going to give me? That's going to, like, what's that look like as far as, like, so I can make a decision?
Yeah. So we do a lot of some legwork in advance. We'll put the registration number, the state registration number on it. We'll put the legal description on it. We'll collect all the data on site where they're the horsepower of the motor, the brand of the motor. If it's a gearhead, the brand of the gearhead, the ratio of the gearhead for what the RPMs are supposed to be running at. Any information off the pump for serial numbers. And then we log the pressures. So we'll have one spot so when we're testing, I guess, let me step back. The question is, how are you testing the flow rate if there's not a flow meter there through a pivot?
Sure.
Well, we have an ultrasonic flow meter that we put different parameters into the meter, the wall thickness, the diameter of the pipe, the type of the material. And then it gives us a spacing for our meter, and we space these two probes out and put it on the outside of the piping. And what it does is it sends a signal through the pipe, bounces off the other side of the pipe, and it measures how long it takes to get from one sensor to the other. So that's how we check the gallons per minute through an existing system, is using an ultrasonic flow meter. So we'll log that in at different pressures. And then when we do our propeller test to see where we're at on different gallons, then we'll have that written, what the amps are, what the drawdowns in the well are, what the pressures are, what the gallons are. And then that's all on a nice little form and shows that. And then, you know, the 12 wells like out in Colorado that we did this summer, I did a full report for each well and on what I experienced, you know, if there was motor vibration, if the shaft is wobbling that goes through the motor, like then that tells us that the bearings are out in probably the motor and the pump, that there could be some expense there. We use our ears too and feel ground. I mean, if you feel vibration in the ground, there can be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, essentially a lot of it is just your experience of just, like, you know, doing it every day, and you could probably walk out there, look at a system that's set up and be like, there's 9 towers on this pivot and this does not look right to me, you know, like right away.
We know what the gallons should be, right. You know, what the pressure should be. And you can look at a nozzle package sometimes and tell, you know, I'll be driving down the interstate and look at a end gun that's like a big stream. It doesn't have the pressure to be getting the spread out. I mean, it's an everyday thing. It's a lifestyle that you grow up and you learn.
I never thought about that, but like I do look at yard signs and stuff like that and different people's fields and stuff. So you probably do like going like, oh, that guy's got a problem.
Well, I drive down the road, I look at windmills, I see a tail hanging, knowing that the tail pin's going to hang off, and eventually that tail's going to end up in the wheel because it breaks. Yeah, I can't give it up. It's driving down the road, I'm always looking at water systems.
That's awesome. Well, let's take a quick break, bud, and we will be right back. The American Land Seller podcast is brought to you in part by LandHub.com. Join us today and experience the expertise of LandHub's land marketing professionals. Whether you're buying or selling, let us show you the way in the ever-evolving world of land transactions. Visit LandHub.com and discover what the future of land marketing looks like. LandHub.com, where your land journey begins. All right, we're back with Joe Richeson with Gothenburg Irrigation and Well Service, located in Gothenburg, Nebraska. I know that place. My office is probably about 5 blocks away from where you guys are at, and so it's not that big of a place, but it's mighty.
Yeah.
Got a lot going on for a town of 3,600. So. But I wanted to talk just a little bit about in our part of the country. Well, like we talked about irrigation wells, how important that is. Like one of the things that I run into a lot too. We sell recreational properties. We'll sell ranches. A lot of those have livestock wells on them. I've always been kind of, you don't think about this, but annual servicing and inspections when you're buying it, but after you buy it, annual inspections on your windmills. That's something that, I think a lot of people don't think about, but that's really an important thing, is to make sure that you're looking at those quite a bit.
Yeah, it is. And the days of the rancher that owns a place or having his hired help servicing windmills, it's like anything, whether it's an irrigation well, a windmill, a house well, water's coming out, you don't think about it until it quits. And that can happen with windmills pretty quick. We probably service still 100 windmills a year. There's not a lot of companies that are still in the windmill service and maintenance world. But that's if I had my choice, I'm out, cell phone signal out, podcast on in my ears, pulling a windmill by myself. That's the world that if I could live in every day, that would be wonderful. But yeah, windmills use oil. So there's an oil in there, but that oil breaks down over time, and we'll take the covers off of windmills and it'll be a sludge. And they're made to use oil. They're supposed to lubricate the rod that goes up and down, so that oil is getting outside of the windmill to that rod and using it. I'm not saying you need to, service them every year, but every couple years would be great. And when we service a windmill, we're not just checking the oil, we're checking bearings in it. Even though some of these windmills, they're 70, 80 years old, the design's well over 100 years old. They were designed really well. They're designed with parts that are made to wear out with a softer material, like a pewter bearing, that instead of the cast wearing on cast, the pewter wears out and you need to replace those pitmans and things like that. But annual service on like livestock wells that are electrical, even solar, I recommend shutting the disconnect off on a solar system so you don't have that energy coming from the solar into the controller year round. This sounds crazy, but lightning can hit a solar panel system and can get to the pump and motor. If you have that disconnect off, it's great. Same thing with the irrigation wells. Shut the disconnect off so you don't have that line of service to things. We do have a few people that do an annual maintenance on their house well or their livestock wells, electrical powered systems. But when we're doing that, we're checking amps, and it's kind of the same thing on when we do like an inspection for a sale for a home. We're checking the amps, we're checking the power to it to make sure that we have the 220, 230 volt service. And then we're checking the continuity to the motor to see if we're seeing any leakage there through the wires, and seeing if we're seeing some high amps. We're checking pressure tanks. If there's a bladder style pressure tank, a captive air pressure tank, that there's supposed to be a certain pressure setting on the top side of the tank. We're checking that kind of thing out, and make sure that conduits aren't broke, that mice or bugs or things aren't getting into the well for a contamination reason, or just the mice chewing on wires, and they get into a conduit, they can work their way in, if it's big enough conduit, into the controller, into different things. So we see, especially on the windmills and annual maintenance, not as much on house and livestock wells.
Yeah. Well, and to go along with that though too is like my imagination, like I like you, I'm a big fan of podcasts. I listen to a lot of them. And just the way that the world's going with like blockchain, and people want to know where their food comes from, and like the more and more and more that the consumer is requesting data, on their milk carton or on their, package of ground beef or whatever. I imagine that, like I can only imagine that we're moments away from them wanting to know what the water's like in the area where that animal grew up. And so like, how often do you recommend like doing water samples and stuff like that for like our livestock wells and for like our rural homes and stuff like that?
Yeah. So for in a domestic situation, I'm not saying every year, but every couple years. And I'll give you a perfect example on what just happened just north of Gothenburg a year ago. Got a phone call from someone saying, hey, my coffee was tasting a little bit different. So he went ahead and took a water sample and found that I think it was around 14 parts per million nitrates. And for a healthy human adult, we're supposed to be below 10. And so he checked with some neighbors, and ironically, one of the neighbors about 2 miles away had checked his water in June of that year. This is 2022. And in September, the nitrates went from, I think, 2.3 to over 22 in about a 4 or 5 month time frame. And so when I say testing it annually, it's maybe not a bad thing, because things can change that fast. And we started checking, and there were nitrates as high as 50s and 60s in that 7, 8, 9 mile area. So, but flooding, if there's ever a flooding situation, yeah, the water might not have gotten over the top of the well, but if your well's old enough, it doesn't have the proper sealing in the gravel pack on the well, that flooding situation, that water can leach through the ground and leach down into your well. So having a baseline. Now, if you go do a water sample, whether it's for a home real estate, or you just do your home water test and it comes bacteria, there's no reason to just freak out about it. The state says that 25% of all wells tested will have coliform bacteria in it. Now, coliform is not E. coli, but it is a form of bacteria that's kind of the verbiage is it's a precursor that there could be some bacteria issues. But when I say 25% of all wells, that's windmills that don't have a seal, and that's an open top where the rod's going up and down. That's house wells, that's irrigation wells, that's all wells combined. That they say 25%, and I would agree with that. I'm gonna say that on the house well inspections that we're doing, I'm gonna say that 25% of the time we're finding a positive sample for bacteria. Now that can be treated. Bacteria is not naturally occurring in your well. We do a shock decontamination. Ideally, it sits for 24 hours before we put a large volume, couple 200-300 gallons of disinfectant down the well. And the reason we do so much is we're displacing the water in the well, pushing the disinfectant out into the formation, and letting that sit and kill the bacteria. You dump 2 gallons of bleach down your well, it's on the surface water, you're pumping it right out. It's not getting into the formation where the bacteria is at. And chlorine and bleach, they are super corrosive on wells and the pumping equipment. And we'll go to pull pumps at sometimes, and we can't get it out because bleach has been dumped down there and it's corroded the fittings together, and it won't come out. So the bacteria can usually be cleaned. Now, I've seen it high enough that it takes a couple cleanings, but it can typically be handled. Now, nitrates, we can't clean it. You can't boil it. If you boil nitrates water, you're going to increase the volume of the nitrates. So nitrates need to be cleaned with a reverse osmosis system. They are using some black lighting. We're seeing some UV kind of black lighting thing to do that, but usually reverse osmosis is what's need done. Now, don't think that I have reverse osmosis on my water that it should be all safe. With those high nitrate levels, we were seeing so high that the reverse osmosis could not get it stripped down to the safe drinking water levels. So that's where it's you need to test your water every couple of years.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. I guess I didn't know that about nitrates, that's how you solve that problem with the reverse osmosis system. Is nitrates, they're not really an issue for like showers and stuff like that though, right? Just the drinking portion of it, or?
It is the drinking portion, and the human consumption. I think there's different levels for livestock. So that 50s and 60s, that's not hurting the livestock. I think livestock can be well into the hundreds, but it's the human consumption, and there are some numbers out there that say we actually need to be below 3. So there's a big jump between 3 and 10. So you can do reverse osmosis systems for your whole house. But I want to caution, when you're on a private septic system, that for every gallon of water that you run through your reverse osmosis that you consume, you're going to at least discharge that volume into your septic system. So if you're going directly into a septic system, you're going to get a little bit hard on your leach field. So yeah, reverse osmosis it doesn't waste the water because it's going back into nature, whether it's through your septic system or whatever, but it uses water.
Yeah, wow, that's pretty fascinating. I didn't know that about that either. So, those of us that live downtown and pay for our water, that's kind of that might be something to think about.
Yeah.
But all right, well, I think this is a good time to take another break, man. This has kind of been fascinating for me. Like I said, in my business, I can I walk out, look at a pivot and think, man, something ain't right. But I appreciate you taking the time to kind of walk us through some of this stuff. You got time for maybe one more segment?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right, brother. We will be right back. The American Land Seller Podcast is brought to you in part by American Legacy Land Company. At American Legacy, our seasoned agents set us apart, providing unmatched service with a personal touch that goes beyond expectations. With a wealth of market knowledge and a diverse portfolio, including farms, ranches, development lands, and recreational properties, we forge lasting connections with clients through honesty, integrity, and transparency. Visit us at AmericanLegacyLandCo.com and find the land that defines your legacy. All right, we're back here with Joe Richeson from Gothenburg Irrigation and Well Service here in Gothenburg, Nebraska. Joe, we were kind of just, I had mentioned on the break that I remembered that you get to sometimes use explosives in your business. Talk just a little bit about what we're doing with the explosives, and you were also mentioning that you were cameraing, you were running a camera down and actually looking at the casing and stuff like that. So just how did you get into that? First of all, I don't think everybody does the explosives. Am I correct?
Yeah, no, I would say across state of Nebraska, there's less than 8 or 10 contractors that are doing it. So when we're servicing an irrigation well, after we pull the pump, you can't stick the camera down there when the pump is in there, but we'll stick a full dual view. It looks down, it looks to the side, and does a 360-degree rotation, and we'll look at the casing of the well to make sure that we don't have any problems, whether it's holes rubbed through or rotted through. And then we'll also look and see where the perforated slots are to see if they're plugged up, whether it's from a hard iron barnacle or, even in PVC casing wells, we'll get a softer material, whether it's iron or manganese related, that'll have that completely plugged up. And then we'll get a rehabilitation plan in place. And for steel casing, one of the rehabilitation processes we use, it's a Sonar-Jet technology. It's a patented technology, but it's using a explosive concussion that we put down in the well, and that concussion will break the barnacles off the steel casing and open up the slots where the water needs to come through, and the energy will actually get back into the gravel pack, bounce the gravel pack, and reformulate it and break things loose and hopefully open those slots up so you can have a better specific capacity on your pumping. So what that means more that you're drawing down less than you were at certain gallons, that it just helps with the well.
So you had mentioned, like you said, you'd stick a camera down there. You actually can send some of the video and stuff like that to your clients, right? And you can say, this is what you're dealing with, and kind of walk them through what the solution is, no matter what that is, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So if they're on site, we'll put it on a USB flash drive, and I kind of joke with them. It's a pretty expensive little video it's not your $19.95 DVD or flash drive, but I'll get back to the office and upload them to Dropbox. And if the customer has Dropbox, we'll just share that link with them. Otherwise, we'll copy and paste the link, and then they can upload it or just view it through the cloud and see what they're working with. And we have a lot of customers that are absentee landowners and even customers. I mean, I sent it to a customer here that lives 10 miles east of town, and he watched the video and called me up, and we go over it there. So they're not having to drive to town or be there when we perform the video inspection. And the video inspection, it's a color video. And there's times that you don't even realize you're in water because the video is so clear. But if we go into a well that is turbid and dirty, that's a sign that the perforated slots are plugged up because the water is not interacting from the outside to the inside of the casing. And that tells us a lot, that if we get down there and it's cloudy, that we're running into a situation that's not ideal.
So, man, just listening to you for as long as we've been on here, I mean, there are just too many to count, really, things that can be issues when you're talking about wells. Like hot. I mean, it goes back to kind of our initial conversation, which is, like just having it be standard for somebody. Like I think there's quite a few people in my industry that listen to this, like in our industry, just having that person go out and check as they're getting the listing, right? Like just get it out of the way so that we know there's going to be, if there's a major problem, we can, like we kind of talked about that the other day. If I know there's a major problem, I can build that into like, let's solve it, or at least we can notify people and we can maybe even affect the price of what we're going to list something at.
Right. Absolutely. I ran a radio ad years ago that I said, don't operate your pump to failure. And that's what happens a lot of times is, as long as the water's coming out of the ground and through the pivot or into the stock tank, it's out of sight, out of mind. But in the ag farming world, in this part of the state, in western Nebraska, you don't have anything without that water coming out of the pivot. And, with supply chains and labor shortages, that you used to be able to get a 2 or 3 day turnaround on your irrigation pumps. And that's not my issue. I can do that turnaround. But when we need it sent to the pump shop and worked at, you can see 2-week turnarounds in the middle of summer, and 2 weeks in the middle of July, 100 degrees, you've lost your crop. So it's not a bad thing to have things checked out. And I can go over that with the customer and say, hey, this is what's going to cost to do this or do this. And one thing that we do, if we do an efficiency test on a pump and we end up doing pump work on it, that efficiency test is no charged. So, and when I'm doing some camera work for my customers that we pulled the pump on and we're local, a lot of times if we're doing rehabilitation, we're not charging for that camera work. It's that important. You don't know what you have below the ground until you stick a camera down there.
Right. And then sometimes it's just a matter of whether or not like for whatever project you're doing, you may just do it anyway, just to see what you're dealing with. Gotcha.
Yep, just to make sure that there's something out of sight that we're not seeing.
Yeah, gotcha. No, to me, it just comes down to, and again, one of the things I can say working with you over the years, that's really impressed me is I have no fear of saying, John Doe client, call Joe and talk to him. Or ask you and say, hey, do you mind if I have my client contact you directly? And you have never said, no, I really don't want to talk to your people. So
no, my cell phone number's on the front door on our website. And I'm not going to sugarcoat with a customer, right. Whether I'm not going to tell them what they want to hear. I'm going to tell them the truth about what
they
find.
Need to hear. Yeah. Well, and I think again, we talked about that the other day. that you had gone out to do an inspection on something that somebody was purchasing that was already under contract, and you found some pretty major issues. And if they had known about that prior to, but again, I can't stress enough that that's something that's become kind of, important when we're doing listings. My listing presentation, it includes, here's a list of some stuff you really ought to think about. And we really ought to probably have checked just to make sure we aren't going to get into any issues.
Right. And in that situation, it was a listing, it was for an investor, and the listing was done out of an agency out of Omaha, a realtor out of Omaha. And it was not let known that the pivot was running on surface water. There was an irrigation well there, and no one knew that the pivot was running on surface water. And while I was there, I went ahead and tried to test the irrigation well, and my lay flat hose fluffed up, the air was coming, and then it went flat as could be. It was listed with so many irrigated acres of groundwater irrigated acres. Nothing ever mentioned how many surface water acres were with the property. And the irrigation pump literally wouldn't bring water to the surface. And that was not known to the realtor or the buyer that was under purchase contract.
Well, and I mean, if you're an investor, I mean, we were talking about that earlier. The thing that we kind of looked at was, it was the realtor didn't know to check it. The person that owned it was a family owned, for 50, 60 years that the family's owned it. And some lady from California that, some niece or daughter or something that never had anything to do with it owned it. You can get yourself in an awful lot of trouble, especially if something closes. Like, imagine if you hadn't gotten out there and checked that, and that thing closed, and they got a farmer in there next year to come do it, and there's no well, so.
Yeah. Yeah. And someone that lives in California, they're not paying the water rights. They're not paying the canal company for the water rights. They're not paying the electricity bill. That's in the farmer's name. So those water rights typically are on the invoices. So yeah, that's questions to ask. Surface water, groundwater, how many acres are registered for this, and talk about acres in the water well world. You don't have to have permit or acres for anything less than 50 gallon a minute, as long as you're not irrigating a certain acres. Like typically our local NRD is less than 3 acres, because there's some big gardens out there. I mean, so that doesn't fall under the irrigated acre rule.
Right. Well, and that's another thing to look at too, is because we can't, there's the only new wells right now, right? If I understand this in agriculture, the only new wells that we're drilling are ones that are replacing old wells, right? Like we really don't have any, we're not able to add any new irrigated acres, at least at this time, correct?
And that's for the most part correct. Yes, there are, up in Logan County, they are releasing about 1,000 acres every year for new acres. But, and we'll see what quote unquote a new well, but it's a supplemental well. As long as you're not, back to your comment about adding acres, as long as you're not adding acres to what's water's being used, a corn crop, they base it off of corn acres. A corn crop's only going to use so much water. So right. If it comes out of 2 wells because the one well isn't enough water to pump the system, that a supplemental well, that you're seeing that. But I don't know if you'll see the supplemental wells at some point. It's not we're in dire need of the cutting back, but it's just the local NRDs. That's the beauty of Nebraska, is there's local control for the most part for that specific area. It's not one person overseeing or one entity overseeing the entire state, that they try to leave it on your local NRDs.
Right. I mean, because it's like everything else, Nebraska's a pretty big state, and what works for, eastern Nebraska is not going to be anywhere near what works for Scotts Bluff. That's
correct.
two different planets.
Right.
If
Absolutely.
you've ever traveled across the state, but
it is.
But anyway, brother, well, I have had a blast having you on here today, and I've learned a lot. I knew I would. If you don't mind, why don't you tell people, if they're, you're willing to travel a little bit, Kansas, Colorado. I don't know if you get out to Wyoming, but how do we get a hold of you? What's your credentials?
Yeah. So GothenburgIrrigation.com is our website. My email, Joe, at GothenburgIrrigation.com. And I'll throw my cell phone number out there. It's 308-529-1181. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. I don't do a lot of social media, but, last week when we had the blizzard, I sent a quick note out to, irrigation guy or stock water guys on irrigation wells. Cover your irrigation motor. Snow blows up into your irrigation motors, and you start the motor and it burns up the motor. So yeah, I do a little bit, but not as much as we probably should. But I stay busy enough otherwise.
Yeah, I think, like a lot of us have the same problem. There's so much that we should be doing, but there's only so many hours in the day. So I'm with you on that. I don't do as much on my social media as I should. I'm definitely a sender, not a receiver. So,
right.
But anyway, well, I appreciate you being on, my friend, and I hope you have a great 2024.
Sounds good. Appreciate the time, Kobe. Appreciate what you're doing.
All right. Well, that's it for today, and we will see you all down the road.
As we wrap up another episode of the American Land Seller Podcast, thank you for joining us. Visit www.americanlandseller.com and find us on one of your favorite podcast platforms. If you would be so kind and you enjoyed today's insights, please like, subscribe, rate, follow, and review us on whatever app you are listening or watching on. Connect with us on social media for updates. Until next week, Kobe wishes you success in your land endeavors. God bless you and have a great week.
The American Land Seller Podcast is brought to you in part by LandHub.com. At LandHub, we're revolutionizing land transactions by effectively connecting buyers and sellers. Say goodbye to the struggle of finding or marketing land for sale. We understand the power of new media marketing, leveraging social media, and targeted ads to bring together the ideal audience for all property types. LandHub.com, where your land journey begins. And American Legacy Land Company. At American Legacy, we redefine excellence in real estate. Explore our top quality offerings featuring farms, ranches, recreational properties, and even development projects spanning 10 Midwest states. Visit us at AmericanLegacyLandCo.com for a premium experience that aligns with your land ownership goals. Whether you're looking at buying or selling, we're dedicated to helping you find the land that defines your legacy.